the most relatable topics on retrieval are mnemonic devices, and everybody's got their own ways of memorizing things, such as the 9 planets. My very educated mother just served us 9 pizzas. That's the 9 of them in order, starting with Mercury and ending with Pluto, which has been re-promoted as a planet. So there are some clever ones out there. I encourage you to look at the video and the one that follows this one in the order that we have them. A 5-minute clip on Andy Bell, the 2002 World Memory Champion, and his method of loci. And the bottom line is he pegs aspects of his memory to be taxed as a function of places that he's familiar with and has walked around in. So, for instance, as I leave the building here in McKibben and I go over to the Baker Patillo Student Center, I've got a path that I know. I know what the flight of stairs looks like. I go out the double doors, come by Surf and Steve pretty quickly, take a right turn by the sesquicentennial wall, and see a few other things on my way over to Baker Patillo. Now, if I were going to memorize, say, some numbers of pi, I could append numbers to each of those images, which is what Andy Bell does. What he actually does in this video seems physically impossible. It's one of the more impressive things I've ever seen, and it's certainly worth your 5 minutes. What he does is memorizes the order of 520 playing cards, 10 decks of 52, and he can tell you the 8th card in the 2nd deck and the 25th card in the 3rd deck, etc., based on this method of loci and some other elaboration that he does. And you can see how he's obtained this status as the world memory champion. And the thing that underpins this idea is that we have a very, very good memory for location and journeys. And as I think of my drive home, a short distance here in Nack, I could practically tell you every blade of grass. I've lived here 10 years, and I can tell you all the buildings that lay between me and my home or work at home. And it's amazingly vivid image. It's a gift that we humans have for locations and imagery like that. Another technique is interacting images, and Andy also taps on this one. A study reported way back in the late 1890s anticipated the usefulness of this technique. Recall of concrete nouns of list when they were told to form images of the words in comparison when they were not given such instructions. And then this was followed up by Gordon Bauer, who just died recently, found similar results. So he mentions goat pipe, which you'll see with Andy Bell. He also uses the interacting images technique. He labels the 2 of clubs a pineapple, and I think the 9 of diamonds a saw, and they followed each other in a deck. And he imagined the saw sawing the pineapple, the 9 of diamonds sawing the 2 of clubs, and forever linked those 2 things together. That's interacting images, which can be done. So if I had to do something somewhat unusual, even at this age, to imagine the first 500 characters of pi, I think I could do it. Give me a few weeks, but I could create some kind of narrative with these numbers interacting with each other and create a pretty extraordinary image. Whether it's interacting images or the method of loci, I think I would have some success at that. And as Andy Bell will tell you in that video, anybody could do it. And I agree. It's not any kind of special ability. It's just a commitment. A third method is the peg word. You'll see a clip that follows Andy Bell in which we peg words to each other. In fact, they use this exact example. This is one of Gordon Bauer's experiments with Zimbardo, as you'll see. 1 is a bun, 2 is a shoe, 3 is a tree, 4 is a door, 5 is a hive, etc. And then you ask someone to recall all the words in order, and they begin to create relations to each other. So 1 is a bun, they rhyme, that's easy enough. 2 is a shoe, 3 is a tree, I'm imagining the shoe in the tree. 4 is a door, and the door is blocking the beehive, etc. I'm making silly narratives there, and I can create some fairly concrete images, and that's this peg word technique. I begin to pair things together and can create a memory for them. And as you'll see, a live demonstration of that dating to about 1990 with Bauer and Zimbardo, with Bauer being this great memory researcher that Zimbardo actually worked with at Stanford. So also there are non-imagery techniques. For instance, every good boy deserves fudge, or every good boy does fine. Another one I've seen is Elvis's guitar broke down on Friday, to remember the characters of the treble clef in music. And I also spoke of the ones for the planets. I like those little gimmicks, and it's amazing what you remember with those things. The words in the sentences serve functions similar to those of the images, etc. All are mediators. They're internal codes that connect the items, which with just a little bit of cleverness, it's amazing the expanse of long-term memory, what you could really get out of it. So here's a summary of those techniques, and there's some more mediation techniques like the Great Lakes, Superior, Michigan, Huron, Erie, and Ontario. She made Henry eat onions. So if you live up in that region, it's important to know what the 5 Great Lakes are, and that would be a way to memorize them. Some other retrieval principles that are beyond these clever devices, although I think they are terribly clever. Encoding specificity. There's a suggestion that the environment in which we encode is critical. So all things equal, I want my stats students on Monday, Wednesday, Friday to take their test in the same classroom. It would be horrible for us to go through the entire semester and then take a final in a different room. Now, maybe some emergency might present itself in which that actually happened. I remember in grad school, I was teaching a class, and we had some extraordinary emergency during finals week in which the electricity went out, and some of the classrooms didn't have windows, or most of them didn't. And so the students wound up taking finals in other places. It was a disaster. And I often wondered if that mismatch of the learning environment and where they took the test made some sort of difference in how they did. I bet it did. So the idea is that when material is first put into long-term memory, encoding depends on the context in which the material is learned. So that context could be a physical state. It could be a room. The manner in which information is encoded is specific to the context, and at the time of recall, it's a great advantage to have that same context. And you think of the subtleties of a room, the smell of the carpet, the hum of the light, the cinder block that you may come across in an older building like Ferguson or something like that. It's amazing how subtly different buildings can be. A retrieval cue will be effective if it reinstates the original encoding to be remembered. So in experiments, they've shown when a word like black is presented without context, it's presumably encoded with regard to its dominant meaning, such as color. Therefore, white serves as an effective cue, and a weak associate like train would not. However, when black is encoded in the context of a weak associate like train, like a black locomotive, subjects are more likely to engage in a more idiosyncratic encoding. So it may be the case that we do have some sort of idiosyncratic encoding that other people wouldn't have, and it serves as a clue. For instance, the word swift. Swift means fast as an adjective, and older people would consider that their basic encoding of the word. Younger people today, especially Super Bowl aficionados or music people, would encode that with Taylor, the musician. So even information unrelated to the material, such as environmental stimuli, can become a cue. The complexity of a room. One of the great experiments that was done, it was very clever, again by Gordon Baddeley, who did so many wonderful things, used scuba divers. And basically the bottom line is, it's a really direct notion. The participants that learned words whilst underwater wearing scuba gear tended to recall those words better while underwater. And the same with the participants that were on land. Now you can imagine the particulars of how this was engineered was not so easy, but it was a very clever experiment. So as the last sentence says there, lists learned underwater were best recalled underwater, etc., and the reverse. So a rather difficult thing to engineer, but showed that there was some environmental cue there that prompted that learning. And to be removed from that is a disadvantage. And here's a graphic illustration of that. There's also state-dependent learning. So material learned while someone is intoxicated is usually recalled better when they recreate that state. And by the way, to ensure that you don't use this method to excuse a party, she says, I must note that overall performance is best for those that learn while sober. She is half kidding there. But there's also state-dependent memory. So, for instance, the finding of efforts was that participants who learned material while in a chemically altered state showed better recall if they were again chemically intoxicated at the time of recall. So later studies suggest that this state-dependent memory, like a context effect, is found only with recall and not with recognition. And it's worth separating again recall and recognition. Recognition is deceptively easy. So if I confronted you with some, years from now, decades from now, famous psychologists, and I presented Freud, oh, definitely. I presented Watson, definitely. I present Eugene Martin. Oh, that doesn't sound right. I don't remember anybody named Eugene Martin. So in that case, recognition can be very powerful. If I asked you to recall, on the other hand, famous psychologists, if you drift on to do something else for a living, that may be a lot harder. Recall is much more difficult. But recognition can be deceptively easy because sometimes it looks familiar, but you've got the wrong context. There's also the mood-dependent memory effect has proven more complicated. In other words, if I'm in a joyous mood or a particularly despairing mood, I may recall things better later. Now, there's also the spacing effect in terms of retrieval. And the suggestion is, and I've told my Monday, Wednesday, Friday classes this, I strongly believe the better approach is to spread out learning. And that's why I prefer Monday, Wednesday, Friday classes, 3 50-minute sections versus 2 75-minute sections. And the idea is if you repeatedly study the same material, you're much better off spreading it out than learning it all at once. You just retain more. Some of that's physical. Sleeping on the information, it actually congeals in terms of the physical learning in your cerebral cortex. And you have more of a chance to do that if you're meeting more often and for shorter amounts of time. So cramming is very difficult to do. You just simply can't retain it. There's no physical instantiation of what you've learned. So a variety of theories seek to explain that spacing effect, although some are physical. Spacing allows the context of encoding to change so that a wider variety of cues can be attached to the material. The greater number of cues, the greater chance that one or more of them will be activated at the time of retrieval. So it may be the case that you study with your friends on the second floor of the Steen Library and also at Starbucks, etc. And the variety of cues can contribute to recalling something that's a little bit difficult, like if you're taking stats or something. Occasionally we'll have cues that are very valuable, but they can become overloaded. For example, the basic principle here is that a retrieval cue is most effective when it's highly distinct and not related to anything else. For instance, think of some famous authors. Edgar Allan. Who else could that be? That's got to be Edgar Allan Poe, right? That's the only famous writer that ever had that sequence of names. Then Maya. Is there a famous writer named Maya? Yes, Angelou. So those cues are very distinct and not overloaded. On the other hand, William could be a lot of people. Shakespeare, Forsyth, a million people. So William is overloaded, as maybe Stephen would be, although you could think of Stephen King. So the more distinct a name is, the more likely it is to contribute to a strong memory of that, like Edgar Allan. But if the cue is overloaded, then in the case it doesn't do you much good. It has too many fans, if you will, too many branches that it could possibly be. Another last section, and this is the longest video we've had all semester, I'm sorry for the sheer length of this, is the testing effect. And I'm a big, big, big believer in this. And I'm against colleges that don't have tests. I think that's a mistake. There is a state college in California, UC Santa Cruz, that has this glorious policy of not having tests, and I think it's an error because life is a test in so many ways. But Roediger, a very famous cognitive psychologist at a fairly advanced age, he was in his early 60s when he launched this research, demonstrated the testing effect in a series of studies. The researchers compared students' performance on material that they had studied, but not been quizzed on with the same student's performance on material that they had been quizzed on.